Good afternoon, Marine. Give me your name and where you are from.
I'm Craig Harlan Hullinger from the south side of Chicago. Before initially, and now I live in Sarasota, Florida.
When did you serve in MASS-3?
I was in MASS-3. I got in country in December Eve, actually, 1969. I've been in the Marine Corps almost 3 years at that point. And when I arrived in the airport, it was dark, and we went over to a receiving center right in the base of Hill 327. And it was misting and raining, and there was a big firefight going on top of the hill. Firing from machine guns and rifles and explosions, and everybody was afraid. They said, "Oh man, we're getting hit, take cover." And from there then I went to Marine Wing Communications Squadron for about 1 month. And then I got assigned to Hill 327, and I asked the first sergeant, "Where is that?" And he took me outside and pointed up to that same hill. And when I got up to the hill, I asked the guys the Marines about, was there a big firefight Christmas Eve? And they kind of embarrassedly said, "Well, no, it was just Christmas Eve, and we were celebrating by firing."
What was your job there?
I was a communications officer, and so my job was to make sure that the unit, it's an air control unit, MASS-3 is an air control unit, and we made sure that the infantry got the air support they needed, helicopters and fixed wing. And my job was to make sure the communications worked so that we could talk from the air control center down with the 1st Marine Division, and also we had radar teams scattered around the northern part of Vietnam. We had to work those as well.
What'd you like about your service?
Well, I loved being in the Marines. It was great, and my highlight was in Vietnam, actually. And you know, you train for this job, and then finally you get there. And Hill 327, MASS-3, where I spent most of my time in MASS-3, was on top of a 1,000-foot hill. It was a gorgeous place in terms of view. You looked out over the South China Sea and China Beach of movie fame, the Monkey Mountain, Marble Mountain. To the south, you looked at Happy Valley, which where a lot of fighting went on, and then the mountains to the west, and then Hai Van Pass and Big Mountains to the north.
So, do you have any interesting stories to tell us?
Well, there's all kinds of interesting stories. We had, as I said, we had the radios on top of Hill 327. They were remoted down below, about 3 miles away, to the desk, the Direct Air Support Center. And it was quite a challenge to make that work. The cable that connected them had been shot full of holes, and it was filled with water, and everything crosstalked. So when you walked into the desk, these air controllers were listening to 12 loudspeaker radios, just making all kinds of noise, and it was hard to figure out who was doing what. But after a while, you sat there and you could figure it out. And we also had air support radar teams, one at Quang Tri, one at Birmingham, one at An Hoa, and one at Chu Lai, and one in Da Nang. And we had to support them. So I would go off on a helicopter every couple times a month and go up and visit with them and make sure they had the equipment they needed and the right personnel. And it was also a great, pleasant ride because you'd be in that helicopter. The helicopters had no doors, so it was a beautiful view with the wind coming through and cooling you off because Vietnam was a hot place. And it was just a fun way to see the country, and you can never see it again that way. It was very nice.
Thank you, Marine.
Well, there are all kinds of other things to say. Our people all did a great job. It was a difficult assignment, and they worked hard. We had these ancient radios, tube radios from the Korean War, and they didn't work very well. And then we got modern radios, and our technicians remoted them with the old remotes because we had nothing that would get the signal from the top of Hill 327 down to the desk. And the new radios sounded great, and I listened to them, and I was so proud we're going to have finally good communications for the desk. And so I walked into the desk, I said, "Desk, your problems are over. We've got new radios, they'll work fine. Give a radio check." So the desk called the TAC center for a radio check, and they came back and said, "We hear your transmission. We can't hear anything you say, but we know it's you because of the loud squeal." So I had to crawl out of the desk. I was a little embarrassed. The Seabees were between us and the desk, and they dropped a 600-volt DC cable across our cable. And it shorted everything out and would have killed people if they had their hands on the handset or the headset, but they didn't. So it fried every radio in both the desk and up on the top. Our ASRETs did a great job. they bombed all over the place and did all kinds of great missions. One of the things they did was take a C-130 and drop a 10,000-pound bomb out the back to make an instant landing zone. And it didn't work because the trees were set in every which way. We walked security on the top of this hill. We had to keep the bad guys out. And a lot of the officers just rode a Jeep around the top of the perimeter, and my view was you needed to keep the guys on their toes, so I would walk. And so the names the infantry had for me was the Walker and the Ghost. And they also called, because I would sneak around and make sure they were awake, and they also called me the Blade because I was from Chicago, and therefore I must be a blade, a knife fighter.
So Craig, you're back, you're in a different shirt, and you're upset because I didn't let you tell all your stories. So
Yes.
Tell me your stories.
Yes, you cut me off, and so I've got a few more. I remember one night we had a E5 and above, sergeant and above club, and it was on the south side of the hill looking out over Happy Valley. And you'd be watching a John Wayne movie with a firefight going on in the movie, and then a real firefight would break out below. And you'd see the tracer rounds, the green going out against the red, so your vision would go from the firefight on the screen to the real firefight, back to the John Wayne firefight, back to the real. It was always interesting. And then sometimes Puff the Magic Dragon would come out, which was a extremely powerful airplane with miniguns that just fired away. It was kind of a frightening thing. We had you had to stand duty about every 10 days, which meant you were in charge of the security of the hill. And did I cover this already? Okay. All right, we took a convoy. Did I cover the convoy?
No, you didn't talk about the convoy.
We normally flew back and forth to our 5 remote sites on helicopters. But during the monsoon season, the helicopters couldn't fly. So we'd have to take a convoy up and by ground. And I'd never done the ground trip, so I went along. And somebody else that knew the way it was going to go at the last minute, he came back and handed me the maps and said, "You take it, I've got something else to do." So I was in charge, and none of us had ever been on this trip before. So I'm navigating with these old French maps and blundering through, and I had to take a shortcut because we never would have made it if we'd taken the long route. And we're meandering through these little villas that hadn't seen a Marine unit for a long time, and our troops, of course, were wound up because where are we? We got to Hue, and we couldn't get across the bridge because it was the bridge had been damaged, and we're talking to the Vietnamese, couldn't figure out what they wanted us to do. Finally, we found that it was a railroad bridge. Went up to Birmingham Fire Support Base and then also Quang Tree. On the way back, went over Hai Van Pass, and one of the vehicles couldn't make it, so we left another vehicle there with security, and went over the top of the hill so we could radio back for a tow truck, and the tow truck came and pulled them back in, and the cowboys, we called them, were Vietnamese kids, and they would ride 2 motorbikes, and the kid on the back would jump off the motorbike onto the truck and throw out all the guys' gear. And the guys behind them, when the truck saw this, and nobody shot them, even though they were seeing their life savings and disappearing, so it was kind of a tough thing. I tried to learn Vietnamese. That's impossible. They sing it. We lived in sea huts, which were 16 by 32 foot 2x4 structures made out of plywood. They had a tin roof, and you had big screens on the side where you could roll plastic down to stop the water coming in. Our hill was destroyed by a typhoon in October of 1970, and it was actually kind of fun for us because we didn't own the hill. And the typhoon came, and we were hiding. We got most of the troops off of the hill, and a few of us stayed up there. We took some of the antennas down, and we hid out in a sandbag radio van. And as the typhoon built up, we're kind of, we're young and invulnerable, so we're looking out the door, watching things just fly apart, and suddenly the radio shop, the roof just blew off, and the whole place came apart. It destroyed every building on the hill. So after that, we gave up on the hill, and we billeted our troops down on the flatland and commuted, which is a long commute on a 6x up this switchback road all the way to the top of the hill. I didn't want to do that, so I moved into a ruined sea hut, and the angle of the sea hut was about 30 degrees, so you're kind of an awkward way to sleep, and ate sea rats for the next couple of months. That was kind of an interesting thing. We had dogs. They were just stray dogs, and they became pets for the unit. We had 2 dogs named Ho Chi Minh and Useless. And the 2 different platoons had the 2 dogs. And when they were in the lower area, 200 meters below the working area, the 2 dogs owned their turf. And then they owned their turf when they came to the top of the hill. Each one had a different section. But in between, the 2 dogs would attack and ambush each other and have a wonderful time racing up and down the hill, fighting all the way. We also had, someone decided there was too many dogs on the hill, and a lieutenant was, I don't know whether he did this on his own initiative or not, but he killed the dogs with a shotgun. And that was a very tough thing. I took R&R, I extended for 6 months and took a trip around the world. Also went to Australia and Hong Kong on R&R. I had a great time. It was
Thank you, Marine.
Interesting time. Thank you.